the three things we need to get accomplished at some point. One is, I want to finish up the federal government process with you. The federal government process is we're spending more time on that because that's new to you. The part about the contractor process, a lot of it is what you do in your normal business because you're dealing with RFPs and proposals and that sort of thing. So we can get through that pretty quickly. The other things are like defining what your NAICS codes are, your NAICS codes, so that you figure out which industries that you're specifically going after and what the small business thresholds are for that. So I have slides that we can walk through of how to do that. You can do that in this class while you're sitting here, or if you want to get on the road and work on it at home and just come in with it tomorrow, that's fine with me too. So that's kind of that. What are our thoughts?
I think to do a basic walkthrough and get our hands on it a little bit while we're here face to face is ideal. And then if they want to do maybe more in depth, they could do that on their own.
Okay, sure. All right, so let's pick up. So the federal acquisition process, when we talk about federal acquisition, we're talking about the regulations, procedures, and the specific steps involved in acquiring supplies and services for use by the U.S. government. Again, they're very process-oriented. Contracting officers go to contracting officer school to make sure they understand all these processes and that they can implement them. They have lots of automated tools that help them implement these processes, and your goal is to sort of understand what their processes are and sort of fall in line. It's governed by the Federal Acquisition Regulation System, and as I mentioned, it's in that FAR, that Federal Acquisition Regulation document. So just so you know, the FAR, the 1,500-page document, is the overarching document. Some agencies have developed their own version of the FAR. So NASA has its own version of the FAR. So what they've done is they call it a supplement to the FAR. So here's the FAR and then here's the NASA supplement. DoD has something called DFAR, which is their supplement. So those are just other terms and conditions that you have to comply with if you want to do business with that particular customer. And basically, the federal acquisition process was established with the codification and publication of uniform policies and procedures across all executive agencies. But as I said before, you'll notice certain ones have various tweaks to them. The other thing that's unique about federal government contracting is think of a pendulum. Okay, we start off in the middle. Some contractor messed with the government, took advantage, charged $600 for a toilet seat, and things, it hit the Washington Post and everything, everybody went crazy, taxpayers went crazy, Congress went crazy. So they came up with a whole bunch of new rules and regulations and got to the point where we're over here. And then all of a sudden, like, the government really couldn't buy anything anymore because they were too hamstrung by all the regulations, so then it swings back over this way. Some contractor messes with them again, they put more regulations in place. Regulations become too cumbersome, it swings back over here. So at any point in time, it's just like the weather. We're either in a highly regulated government environment or a loosey-goosey government environment because of what's happened. So when you think about, we're going to talk about some of the key regulations that you need to be paying attention to, and I'll try to give you that historical perspective of why they do what they do. To the untrained eye, it looks like it's chaos, but there have been rational reasons why the government has done certain things over time, and I'll try to share that with you so you feel better as a taxpayer. So the vision for the acquisition process is to deliver. We as contractors are here to make sure the government can meet their mission. The government is all about mission. What are companies all about? Profit. Mission, profit. That's the other thing we're trying to teach admirals and generals, because if you have this very pure view of mission, you're not really thinking about dollars. But if you're dealing with this contractor community, because they're buying the stuff from us, we care about profit. So you've got to kind of balance both of those perspectives to have a successful program. Their goal is to get things in a timely manner, even though that may seem hard to believe, but they're trying to meet a mission, and that mission has certain time frames. The best value supply or service to the customer. So what's best value? It's what represents the best overall value to the government. because again, they're using our taxpayer dollars. So let's say, for example, they wanted to light this room. And I have no idea what I'm talking about, so if there are any lighting contractors out there, ignore me. But let's say that they want 60 lumens in this room. We could either provide the old traditional light bulbs, or we could use those new squirrely ones, right? So which one do you think is going to be more expensive to provide? Squirrely ones. Anybody know the proper term for these things? Other than squirrely ones? I know I'm getting technical on you here, so I just want to make sure I don't lose anybody. But yeah, the squirrely ones would probably be more expensive. So if they looked at our initial proposal and they said this one was higher and this one was lower, which one would they go with?
The lower.
They'd go with lower. But then if you looked at the fact that we have to provide 10,000 hours, how many traditional light bulbs would we need versus how many squirrely light bulbs would we need? We need a lot less of these over here, right? So if you take the less amount and multiply it by that higher unit price, it ends up being lower than buying lots of these, even though the price is cheap. That's what they're talking about with best value. So one of my eye-opening experiences, the first book I wrote was how the government does this federal contracting. 500 pages, very process-oriented, how this whole thing gets done. And one of the things that was so surprising to me was when I taught contracting officers, my naive point of view was that they received proposals, they figured out who was the lowest cost, and that's how they made their award decision. Bim, bam, thank you, ma'am. In reality, the government has 5 volumes of a book that you can get for free online, and it's called the Armed Services Cost and Pricing Manuals. And what they do is they show you all the different ways that they can evaluate your price proposals to figure out who's giving the government the best value. How they look at your individual cost buildups, how they look at your price, all those kind of things. Very useful document for you to read. Why? Because when I teach contracting officers how to do their job, that's what I tell them to use as a reference guide. So they're using that reference guide to evaluate your proposals. Oh, how cool would it be if you had the same playbook that they have so that you know what to do with your pricing. They want to maintain the public's trust. When there's so why is there a $600 hammer or a $600 toilet seat that we hear about in the Washington Post? Why is that?
Somebody's brother, cousin got the contract.
Right? So that's one possibility that they try to avoid. What's another reason why that happens?
They wrote the RFP wrong.
Wrong, or what might be another reason?
Too much detail, or too specific, or
Right, so sometimes the military can use the exact same toilet seat that we have in our bathrooms at home, right? Exactly the same. Other times, maybe it needs to fit in a certain type of equipment, in which case they have to have very specialized hardened requirements. You can understand if this one is the $600 one. We can't get our head around, as taxpayers, why this one that we would use in our own bathroom, why that would be $600. So that's an example of how the pendulum has shifted. In the very beginning, government would say, I need X, and there would only be 1 or 2 providers that could provide X. So guess what? The 2 providers got all the contracts. And then all of a sudden, all these other companies said, hey, wait a minute, I want a piece of the action. I want to be able to do this. So the government had to come up with very stringent requirements to make sure that they could figure out how to award the contract once it was won. You know, who they were going to select as the winning contractor. Because if you have one vendor that's providing it all the time, you don't need to pay much attention to source selection because you always award it to them. But what happened with that one company? What did they do? Remember the pendulum? What did they do? Right. Gouge the government. Oh yeah, I'm the only game in town, I'm going to charge way over here. So what did the government have to do? Put more regulations in effect, increase competition so that you could drive the prices back down. Because otherwise, we as taxpayers were paying $600 for toilet seats. So they want to maintain our trust because when those $600 toilet seats show up on the Washington Post, we as taxpayers get very nervous about the whole contracting process. and they want to fulfill their public policy objectives, meaning they want to meet their mission. They care about things like quality, so they want to make sure that the products that you provide them are of a quality nature. That's another thing that's gone through the pendulum shift. Sometimes they care about quality circles, total quality management. Now they care about ISO standards and capability maturity models and SEI standards. There's various times where different quality language is used. You have to make sure you're compliant with those things. They care about the timeliness. So when they ask you to deliver a product or service at a certain date, that's when they want it by. Otherwise, you're in default of the contract, and they can terminate you for that. They also care about socioeconomic concerns. I'm not making this stuff up that they care about small business. This is on their websites. This is what they care about. So you're the socioeconomic objectives that they're trying to meet. They want to make sure that they maintain procurement integrity. So procurement integrity means that they don't want their perception to be that one company is getting an unfair advantage over another. So if you, what's a local restaurant around here?
House.
Pals. So if you saw me at Pals with the DHS contracting officer and you knew you were going after the same deal I was going after, and you saw me at Pals with the contracting officer having lunch, what would you think?
I need to take you to a better restaurant.
I need to play the game better. You might think that I have an unfair advantage, right? And that's the kind of perception thing. So procurement integrity says that from the time the government thinks about a requirement to the time it's awarded, they really minimize the conversations with contractors. So think about that. When you're dealing with your commercial customers and they, you want to more fully understand what their requirement is so that you can give them the perfect solution, what do? You pick up the phone, you call them, you go out to lunch, you play golf. You have a chance to have those informal conversations with them so that you can give them your best possible proposal. But in the government space, they want to minimize those conversations. And if you do have questions, you submit them in writing, they answer them, and they share the question and the answer with everybody who's interested in this procurement. So that you're not getting information that you're not getting. So everything about the way they do things is very public and transparent. And all this information is provided in FedBizOps. So when we get to FedBizOps, you'll see how you can see who the vendors that have responded with questions, what the government's answer was, how the RFP was updated for that new information, and what you now have to comply with if you want to bid on this particular procurement. So you can see all that there. When they actually purchase items from you, they want to make sure that you deliver or perform them as specified by the contract, so all the terms and conditions you're compliant with, that it's acceptable, meaning you've complied with everything and they formally have accepted it. Any idea why acceptance is so important for the government?
It obligates funds.
They've already obligated the funds to get to this point, but now I've delivered the product.
You get what you pay for, in other words.
I'm sorry?
You have to have acceptance for the contract to be valid.
Right. They have to formally accept what I've done as good enough. It meets the contractual requirements. And I, as a contractor, have to have that acceptance document before I can invoice the government. And keep in mind, acceptance is defined by your contract. So I've worked for IT companies, right? So I have delivered 5 computers. The contracting officer has counted the 5 boxes, and they've accepted it. I've also had situations where I had to deliver the equipment, install it, have it up and running for 90 days, and once I hit day 90 of it running effectively, then they would accept it. So what happens if my computer crashed on day 89? We start that clock again for 90 days. What does that do to my cash flow?
Yeah.
Which is why, as a contractor, I have to pay attention to what the acceptance criteria are. Because I would much rather have them count 5 boxes that show up and call it accepted, then have this 90-day wait period. Now, they try to minimize these 90-day kind of things unless it's like misguided systems, right? But keep in mind that you need to pay attention to those acceptance criteria because it impacts your cash flow. And then meeting terms and conditions. Those are the requirements that the government has for their procurement system. Okay, let's go over to.
That's a very important thing.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the overall process. So we talked about this slide already. These are the differences between doing business with federal agencies versus commercial companies. Now let's talk about the government team. So the first person you have is somebody from the project or program office. They're the ones that will sponsor the acquisition. They're the ones that have the need that has to be met. So they have part of that mission, and they have a need that they're trying to meet. The second group is the people who are actually going to use the product or service being procured. So you've got the program team that owns the part of the mission to accomplish border security, and these are the people who are actually going to be using the product or service on a day-to-day basis. The contracting officer is the only person in the government that can actually enter into a business relationship with you, a contractual relationship with you. Contracting officers have warrants. Warrants mean that they can spend up to a certain amount of money on behalf of the government. So if I'm a brand new contracting officer, I might have a warrant of $500,000. If it's over $500,000, I can't sign the contract with you. I have to take it to my boss, who has a higher warrant than I do, to be able to sign it. Warrants go up to an unlimited amount. When I renegotiated an $8 billion Navy contract, the contracting officer that I was dealing with had an unlimited warrant. She could spend any amount of money for the government. So there's a whole lot of trust that the government placed in her to be able to do that. Each agency has a small business advisor. They're called different things in different agencies, but basically the Small Business Administration is a separate government entity, a separate agency, an executive agency, and they have representatives in every single federal agency to focus on small businesses. So one of the things I'm going to recommend to you is when you find out the agencies that you care about or that have a need for your products or services, that you contact that small business liaison. Because they do things like vendor outreach. Yes, it would be a trip from beautiful Southern Virginia to crazy Washington, D.C., but it might be worth your time and effort to go to a vendor outreach day, because they'll tell you how to be successful for their agency. They also do, anybody ever do speed dating? They do something equivalent with contractors. So they bring in a bunch of program managers who actually have the need, they need to buy products and services, and you sign up for like 10-minute dates with them, where you can sit down with them and say, this is what my company does and this is how I can meet your specific needs. So these are all things that you may want to consider because they really do a lot of outreach. They also do a lot of webinars. You can sit in your home and do these things, some of these things. Subject matter experts, they advise on specific issues of the procurement. So if, let's say, for example, you have a requirement on a contract for intellectual property, they might have an intellectual property subject matter expert that helps the government figure out what those requirements should be. You might have some highly, like cloud computing, they may have a subject matter expert, depending on what the technology is. They have people on their side that can advise on specific issues. And then they have their legal counsel. So typically, anything that falls even slight, so here's the issue for the government. The government wants to be able to issue an RFP to industry. They would like industry to bid to put a proposal together for that particular